Matt Diesel may be running a sports facility, but what he's really doing is rebuilding youth sports from the ground up. Today I met with Matt and we talked about overhyped travel teams, broken expectations, and why the future of athletics belongs to training, mindset, and community, not plastic trophies. This is a conversation every parent, coach, and athlete should hear. Let's go. Welcome to Legacy Unscripted, sponsored by Progeny Coaching. This is the podcast where sports and business collide. I'm your host, Russ Katzman, and here we'll skip the fluff and get straight to the hustle. From athletes turned entrepreneurs to impact-driven business leaders, we dive into the wins, the lessons, and those failures that make legacies worth living. Today, I'm happy to welcome Matt Diesel, CEO of Diesel Sports Complex. Matt, appreciate you jumping on.
Russ, thanks for having me.
So you've got a pretty cool complex up there in Pennsylvania. Why don't you start by giving us a couple minutes about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I own Diesel Sports Complex. It's an indoor-outdoor facility in Cranberry Township, and I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit more of my background, but I was a baseball development guy by trade, and as the vision evolved, I was really looking to build a one-stop hub for development that could impact athletes, families, and communities. So what we ended up doing was remodeling a indoor location. It's about 10,000 square feet. It has AstroTurf in it. It has cages. The cages are flexible. Everything can move back. It's actually currently being modeled into a 24/7 access hitting and softball center so that families can access it whenever they want. It has a weight room in it, and then we have an outdoor turf field. One of the things that I always envisioned was giving athletes that ability to train indoor and outdoors. Being from Pittsburgh my whole life, we have a limited resource of fields, and to be able to walk outside from the indoors and go to outside training, whether it be other sports or not. Again, my focus has always been baseball, softball, but we've been gearing towards a little bit of everything as we moved on. It was to create a one-stop shop, right? And that was one of the things I wanted to help families with. I feel like everybody is going 100 miles an hour and driving to 4 or 5 different locations, whether it be strength and conditioning. I'm a big believer in nutrition and mindset, which I'm sure we'll get into. I think a lot of people don't spend a lot of time training in that, but I think they should. They spend a lot of time in the skills side, but I wanted to kind of combo that all into one hub.
Gotcha. So talk to me a little bit about the business model behind it. Do you do memberships? Do you do one-off? Do you do hourly rentals? Do you have trainers that come in and you get a piece of that? Talk to me about the business.
So this is evolving too, Russ, and this will get into my situation a little bit. So I spent 15 years when I started. I worked for an academy in college, and I did a lot of private instruction. And I'm sure we can dive into that model as well and what it does for the athletes versus maybe the long-term effects of it. But I got into the travel club private side of baseball, and we basically hosted teams from 9 all the way up through high school. And that would include some sort of training model, whether it be in the winter, year-round, how it evolves, and then we would go play in tournaments. And I do believe for about 10 to 12 years of that model, I started when I was 22, I really do believe it was impactful. There wasn't a lot of it out there. In Pittsburgh alone, there was probably 4 of us that would constantly run these teams. So you kind of got your mold of the better players that came to this, right? And then what we would do is we would kind of supplement it with training and work other kids who didn't make it into it. I think about 5-6 years ago, it shifted a little bit, right? And everybody jumped in. And I think youth sports, the hot topic is it's become just a business model, right? Across the country, and it's getting swallowed up by larger equity companies. And I think when it became that business model, it became very watered down, right? So you have a lot of people joining teams. And again, one of the things that I thought made it so successful was the development and training behind it. And I thought it was the commitment of families to stay in one spot. I think you're running up against, hey, sports was never a guarantee. Nothing is, right? And when you pay that money, it comes with an expectation, right? So when you don't get the result, you move on. And I think a lot of times when you're moving on, you're hearing different messages. It's actually harder for players to kind of evolve and develop, right? So one of the things we've started to do is, my model now is kind of moving into a one-stop training hub, right? I always kind of envisioned that, but I was always in the private travel team model. So one of our things is facility use, right? We're offering memberships for players and families monthly, right, that reoccurs. And every cage is going to be set up with a hack attack baseball softball machine. It has an auto feeder and it has switches, right? So you
Yep.
pay your membership, you can come in, hit at any time, right? I think that is a great model for high school, middle school, and even younger players. I think it's going to help parents work with their kids because I think they avoid it if they don't have some way to either throw to them or somebody to help out, right? So I think then the next model is the training model. We have the athletic side and then we have the sports skill side, and those sides are sprinkled in. I have a very different vision for private lessons. You can only do so many private lessons in a week, right? So part of the vision is to build systems around and really educate the parents and educate the coaches, right? So you can start developing almost player development plans for each player so that they can also work on their own. I think in the private lesson side, again, I actually think it breeds a little bit of dependence. We can't stand in the box with you in a game. I don't care what sport it is. You can't. Your coach cannot be there with you, right? So when you're there and you're saying something every single time, I think that has an effect on athletes as well. I'm not saying you can't get better in that hour, but ultimately, if you can't take that hour and replicate it and apply it to the remainder of your week, you really only got better in that hour. So that second tier of that model is sports training and athletic training. And then the third tier is, we're starting to look for field sponsors, advertising around the facility. We run an ABC program for young athletes. And then I am heavily interested in driving the mental game side. So more specialty programs right there and things that we can run or, like off events at the facility, whether it be fitness classes or parents night out stuff. So that's kind of the tier we're moving in, and I'm kind of moving away from the travel component side just because of I think sustainability for life and then also ethically what I believe in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you talk about any business, they're trying to match client expectations or customer expectations. Industries such as yours, every parent believes their child is the next great superstar, right? Except for those of us who knew our children were never going to be in sports, right? But many of them, if their parents have, just that sweet swing or just natural ability, good speed, whatever it may be, they've got the next great superstar on their hands. And then they hand that person over to a trainer and say, make them better. Or a training facility and et cetera. And the trouble you have is trying to set those expectations based on what you've seen, right? Because the tough part, whether it's private lessons, whether it's player development plans, however you want to structure that, they are expecting you to take them from one tier and get them up a few tiers. But as a coach, you can only lead the horse to water.
Yes.
And there's only so much you can do. And so how do you manage those expectations with those individuals that are probably footing the bill for this
Yeah.
when they come to the door and say, here, make this person better than what they are?
Well, and again, I think that's going to change a little bit as the models change. As I'm like, you're catching me
Mm-hmm.
in a period where I am evolving what I'm doing there. Um,
Yep.
I truly believe we can be trained to do anything. I think a lot of time we have the ability inside of us. We just lack the strategy, probably the discipline and action as well too. So I
Yeah.
think, as we change this model, because one of the things I've seen from a team side, it's heavily focused on playing, right? And this is something that I'm centered on too. Like I think youth sports needs a reset, right? Now I'm speaking from the baseball side, but the more I start to talk about that on LinkedIn, I'm seeing there's people across the country that are hitting this hard right now. And I think we're spending more time playing than we are training, right? If you looked at my career at the Division I level, we would have trained 75% of the time, we would have played 25%, right? And that was when we were in one of our peak shapes, right? You're asking young athletes to do the opposite. And by doing that, you're placing that emphasis on wins, you're placing it on plastic trophies, which is a whole nother conversation, right? I think a lot of times, like, I don't really remember many tournaments and games before the age of 12, but if you go to a youth field ages 7 to 12, I mean, it is absolutely nuts at times, right? Like, and you hear, hey, we're building life experiences in blank, and I'm sitting here going, like, are you even going to remember these down the road, right? So, like, I think it's important to really ground ourselves in those instances and make sure that I think there's a coach parent education gap. Now, one of the things I'd like to close that gap, I don't think that gap is ever going to blend completely, right? I just don't. But how narrow can you make it, right? And I think one of these things in these new models is how can we get in front of parents and make sure they understand that process? But it's also my reason for switching. When you blend development and teams, they struggle, right? Because if they don't see the result on the field, which I would know doesn't
Right.
guarantee in college, they're like, well, the training's not working. Well, there never is a guarantee, right? And ultimately, our job as a coach is to make you your own best coach. You can't rely on a coach to perform in game, right? Our job is to continue to make you better today than you were yesterday. So I think managing some of those expectations, it varies based on what you're doing, right? From a private team standpoint, I think it's challenging, right? And I've seen some interesting clips of can you have educational seminars? Can you give them I was reading something on LinkedIn the other day, like, can you give them an avenue to give you feedback? Well, like, I've done that before, but that opens another door, right? Then they think they can start reaching out to you, start talking to you. If I had stories of some of the meetings I've had over the years, you'd start every one and say, let's begin this meeting saying that, you are biased, you want the best for your kid. And I understand we have kids and we want the best for them. But at the same time, I think we as society, like, when you go into a team, it should be, hey, what can I put into this? And it's becoming, what am I going to get out of this? And it's almost a selfishness. There's that lack of selflessness in building teams. And I don't think that's helping that privatization of youth sports. I think training and development is awesome. If we can find a way to partner back with the communities, I think that could be the reset it needs. I also don't think families need to spend $7,000 a year traveling, eating out, doing this. I think you can bring it back home a little bit. Get your weekends back, right? Structurally,
Yeah.
can we do leagues instead of tournaments? I know it put tournaments out of business, right? That's a big part of the business model. Maybe get people Sunday mornings back again and some
Oh,
conversations. I think there's a lot to dive into here. And I'm in the
it's
middle of
funny
all of it,
because
so I don't have any of it figured out.
well, and you joke about that, but I remember when we got to the point of where my son had, was out-aged from the weekend soccer games and that kind of stuff. And we're like, ah, we got to have our Saturdays back, right? We don't have that. And we loved him. Don't get me wrong. We loved watching him run around the field. We loved him being active and that kind of stuff. But man, and that's not even travel. That was just showing up at the soccer field every week. Yeah, you flash back, you talk about youth sports, and I do want to dig into this a little bit because I think it's a topic that not enough people are talking
Yep.
about. But I do think it's an interesting one. I mean, I look back. I remember, of course, I'm from the generation we didn't have participation trophies when I was a kid,
Well, we
right? I
we
think
we have them today.
yeah, well, exactly. And I think back, my son, when he was first in T-ball, I think in the first grade or whatever age he was when he was in T-ball. And I will say his ratio of number of baseballs thrown to number of dandelions picked in the outfield was a little bit askew. It was quite clear what he was there to do, and that was pick the dandelions in the outfield, until the train came through behind the field, and then all the boys went to the back and just watched the train. But that was T-ball, right? And it was what it was. And at the end of the season, they had a presentation with trophies and all that kind of stuff. Well, I had missed the whole email about buying a trophy for your kid and that kind of stuff. And so my son was the only one who didn't get a trophy. And he's looking up at me, and my fault. I didn't realize it, but it's one of those things where, as a parent, I mean, it was quite clear he wasn't going to play baseball. But as a parent, you want to keep them active. You want to get them out and doing stuff, but you want them doing stuff they enjoy. You want them doing it because they want to do it, not because you want to see them on the field or because you're trying to live out one of your childhood dreams or anything like that.
Wow, and I'd
Um,
like to pause you there because I think that's an important
Go
piece
ahead.
as you talk about the reset and the mental game. Again, there's a coach parent education gap, and I think that's an important component. This is their journey, not ours. Even watching my own kids, there's
Yeah.
times where like I'm gonna bite my tongue and I'm not gonna say anything because I've watched too many people say stuff all the time, right? And we're human, right? So we still do it, but at the same time, it's their journey, not yours, right? So you got to drop everything, whether we played, whether we didn't. I went to the Division 1 level, but I didn't have anything near a successful career, and then you wonder why, right? And that's why I jumped into the mental game so much. And truthfully, I believe it was called because I was called to coach and impact on that side, right? I think a lot of people associate playing and coaching together, and they're not even anywhere near the same. I don't have stats on this, but if you look at like an NFL, check out how many NFL coaches we're actually players. I think it's going to be on the lower end than most people think. But I think in the privatization of youth sports, people are like, oh, you played? Great. This will be fantastic from a coaching standpoint. I think it's actually the opposite. I think sometimes, and it's not always, right? Every case is different. But if you were really successful and you didn't really have to dive into how it felt to your body or the way you had an approach or what you were thinking in your mind,
Yep.
you might have no idea. And just because it worked for you doesn't mean it works for another, right? It's not one size fit all. And to be honest with you, I think I'd make a heavy argument that I think it starts mentally up here and how we think and how we approach things, right? Because the game's going to get tough. I think that's the great part. I had a guy talk to me this morning and he said, all my good hires have a collegiate sport background. And looking at my experience, like, I'm like, it doesn't surprise me, right? Like, we had discipline, we had structure, we had mindset. Like things got really tough, right? I'm not saying it has to come from there. I just think when he said that, it kind of rang a bell, and it's like, yeah, a lot of that does come from there, and you could go through it, and you might not have that. I don't know. Right? Today's society is definitely changing, and the next generation is interesting to deal with as they come up through.
Yep. Well, it's interesting. You talk about that collegiate athlete mindset. I love coaching former athletes that are now business owners, because of what you just said. All that stuff about structure and drive and the competitiveness and some of that, but also coachability, right? The ability to understand, hey, I don't know it all. There's somebody else I can go to help me along the
And
way.
that's all of us,
I
right?
want to touch
That's
on something
huge.
else before we. Sorry, what was
I said
that?
that's all of us, right? Coachability, have a
Yeah.
growth mindset. That's an interesting piece in today's world, but I think you got to have it.
I'd like to say it's all of us, but
Needs
it's
to be
really
all of
not.
us. I should have clarified.
Should be all
Should
of
be
us.
all of us.
Yes, all of us should recognize that. So I want to emphasize one more thing before we get off this youth sports thing and get kind of back to the business. Talked to an individual yesterday, from he's in sports and athlete into business and that kind of stuff, and we talked about the length of playing career. And I think the thing that sometimes parents think about, because they see superstars on the television and they see the kind of money that these guys are making and the contracts and all that kind of stuff, and they're wowed by that. But the fact of the matter is, even the best individuals that go through these athletic careers, they may last 8 or 10 years, right? The average NFL player lasts 3 years, right? They still have the rest of their life to have to be a human being and have to be a person and have to relate to people and to have to know how to act in society and to treat people the way they should and stuff. And this is where that mental side of it is so important, of training it in those early years. Uh, you mentioned the mental training that you've brought in. Talk to me a little bit about what you do with these kids, how you get them in the right mental space.
Yeah, so to be honest, it's been a passion of mine for a long time. I think what stirred it was looking at college and wondering why it didn't work, right? Like why did I struggle? And then you start reading one book and it leads to another one and you follow somebody else and it just became, and you could become obsessed with it, right? So like truly, I pick and choose who I follow and what I read right now just because there's so much out there, but it's so nice to have
Sure.
conversations on this. One of the things that I think, whether it be the private side, it's harder on the private side, right? Because you're not with somebody every single day. I think that's the challenge parents don't quite understand. If you join a team, maybe you practice once a week, twice a week. It's not even all year round, and it shouldn't be all year round because we want multi-sport athletes, right? But when you're not hearing that message every single day, or you're with me for 2 days a week, well, guess who you're with the other 5 days? Your parents,
Yeah.
right? I'm not sure they're going to want to hear what I have to say here, but at the same time, like, what are you instilling on a morning basis at every conversation? Like, if we're losing dinner conversations, that's valuable time to instill values or plant seeds in their head, right? And I think that's a piece. Like, if I go coach at a high school or a college level or a pro level, you're with them every single day, right? So at any high school level I ever coached at or led the program, like, we're talking about conversations, and I think people miss this all the time. They're like, "What'd you do drill wise? What'd you do blueprint wise?" Yes, we have good blueprints, right? I'm not going to say you can't just do anything and be good, but like, it really comes down to structure. I can't tell you how many things I've made up on the spot too, because I think this is going to
Hmm.
make it better, right? I think it's trial and error, and I tell everybody that, right? And then document and systemize it to the best of your ability. But I think is what most people miss is those conversations in the beginning that lead to how they're thinking and how they're processing. And again, like, can you get somebody in the mindset of, if I'm unchallenged, I'm unchanged, right? I mean, we as humans are wired to be comfortable and do as little as possible to succeed, right? So like if that's the case and that's we as humans, that means we're going to have to be intentional about what we do to break that pattern. And I think and I love high school kids because I think they're like sponges, right? Like they haven't had much.
Yeah.
I think the older we get, the harder it is to break the pattern. It doesn't mean they can't be broken. I think that's something I've probably always just believed. I'm like, oh yeah, you can change this, you can change that. And people are like, no, you most don't. And I'm like, but you can. I've lived in a world where I've watched it happen on a daily basis. I've watched players transform. I've watched people transform. So like you're talking to the wrong person if I'm going to sit here and say nobody changed because I believe it's all changeable, right? You just have to be
Yeah.
intentional in what you do and have the right strategy. But they miss that blueprint on the mental game side. So I've run workshops. I've always implemented it from a team standpoint. I would really like to take it a step farther and get it into the community with actual seminars, programs, and whatnot. And you're kind of catching me in that stage as I transition the facility. But like right now, like I have resources built out on Google Drive. Like I have 10 for parents, right? I've been sending it to ADs, and actually one gave me really good feedback from where we're at. She's like, this is great, but she's like, it is a lot. And she goes, just remember, like, are parents open to changing, right? Like, for
Yeah.
instance, one of them is like, hey, the top 3 things to say after a game, because what happens most of the time after a game, you start analyzing everything that happened in the game, right? And I think it's important. I read something awesome the other day because I, do coaching my own kids. I didn't want to coach them, but like I'm kind of end up doing it because like I want them to have the best possible. But I think it's important to ask them, do you want dad today or do you want coach today? Because I don't think you can be both at the same time. They're two different things. And when I think about what I tell parents to say, it's like, hey, I love you after the game. It was awesome watching you. And then by the way, just a reminder that this is always like we over me, right? Like you are part of something bigger than yourself, because I think a lot of those conversations turn individual, and I think that just
Yeah.
breeds more selfishness. And we obviously all have pieces of that inside of us, but like when it comes to teams, we're trying to get that piece out of it because it's never the best team that wins. I don't know if you can ever name a championship where the best team. It's the team that plays the best in the given moment that wins, right? So like it's the case. How many you might be favored on paper, you might look better on paper. It doesn't mean anything by the time you get there. Now in youth sports, it probably does because there's that distinction and that difference between how athletic a kid is, and that's why it's so messed up these days, because it all evens out down the road, right, when you start going. But it's not at youth levels. If one kid's more athletic, the chances are they're probably gonna succeed, which starts spinning parents' heads.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part about the whole we versus me, and I love those questions or those comments that you have them at. In fact, I'd love it if you could throw those in the show
I
notes,
absolutely will. Yeah,
if you're
I have
willing to
no
share
problem
those,
sharing them.
um, because I think that everybody and anybody should see those. Um, Talk to me about one of those little tidbits that you find yourself giving to everybody. What's that one limiting belief that you find yourself working through with every single one of these kids as they come through, that they come into you with this belief and you have to work it through with them?
Ooh, that's a great question. I believe, and I could probably give you a lot of different answers on this one. You know,
Sure.
I try to simplify because I read something probably a couple years ago where it was like 87% of people don't get their top 3 things they want to get done daily. And that was years ago, so I can only imagine that might not have even gone down, right? That might have gone up at this point. And if that's the case, so what is it that prohibits us from doing that? I try to find a word that you can, and words are words until you embody them, right? And you embrace them and then actually
Yeah.
put them into action, right? So like truthfully, I believe it's about building an identity, right? And if you can build a larger identity and with values and different things, but if you can build a one word identity, and what I would think that would be that you can embody is probably the word extreme. Like if you can be extreme in everything you do, whether it be energy, whether it be action, whether it be love, whatever it is, if you're extreme, you're doing more than the average person, right? So you're doing more than expected, and I think that's going to take you a lot of places, and no matter what you're doing it in these days.
Yeah, and extreme puts you way out on the end of that bell curve, right?
Yeah,
It's going to be a long time before you get out there.
yeah.
Yeah, if you want to be
It's a
good,
direction,
yeah,
right?
you
It's
can
a
be good,
direction.
right? Yeah, and great is even better than good, but it's not extreme, right? This isn't extreme, and what that does is it creates that expectation that You just keep going.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. No matter what we're doing, no matter how good we're getting, it's the one more philosophy. It's the even the doing the one more push up, the one more pull up, the one more swing, the one more minute in the batting cage, the one more throw. All of those things that you have to work under the assumption that your competition is working to this point, and you can just do a little bit more. That you yesterday would have worked to this point, and you could do just a little bit more.
And I think I'll
That's
add
that
one more
extreme
thing to
work.
that because I have a lot there, right? But you
Yeah.
know, I think when you talk about commitment and feelings, and again, everyone's word means something different to everybody these days, right? So I think it's important to bring clarity and definition, no matter what you're talking about. And I'm not feelings are real, right? But they're also temporary, right? And you also don't want them to guide every decision you make to act. That's
Hmm.
another thing I talk to them a lot about because, like, yeah, you wake up and most of the time you're like, I don't feel like going to school, right? They'll all raise their hand and go, I don't want to do this. And that commitment has got to be greater than that feeling. And I think if you define commitment too, it's everybody goes. I love when they'll say, hey, they'll use the word commit in commitment when I tell them to define it, right? And I'm like, so I was like, you don't have a definition of it, right? And I'm like, okay, is it saying yes? And they're like, yes, it's means I'm going to go do this. And I'm like, but that's easy to say now. And then I'm like, it's not just saying yes, it's when the mood you set it in is long gone. Can you go back to it, right? And I don't know what percentage of society that is. Maybe you have a take on that, but like to me, when it gets that tough, where you're like, I want to quit, and I don't know if many people get to that point, right? And I think it's important to find ways to instill that into kids and challenge them, right? Because the more they go through those periods, we're like, I'm going to get through this and look for solutions. It kind of becomes second nature to them as they go. And if you're the flip opposite, where we're always maneuvering away from that, then I think that's what you end up doing as you move on in life too.
I agree. I love this stuff. We could talk about this forever.
This could be the whole
Um,
the whole show.
it's going to be the whole podcast again. We'll do a part two and get to that. But I do want to take that same idea and take it to
Yeah.
business, right? How have you taken some of this drive, this commitment, this extreme, let's keep working every day to the extreme. How have you taken that and applied it to your business philosophy and your business daily activities?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting again going from the private travel world to what I'm doing now. I always believed in this development hub vision, right? But I always incorporated it into the team side, and I just see so much more potential and value from a community standpoint. I feel called to do this. I have a very strong faith background, and I'm not afraid to share it too. I think this
Hmm.
is a way to impact and serve others, right? And again, like it's taking those models and it's bringing the right people in too. That's been a challenge for me. I'm sure we'll get into my situation of how I did this project and how SBA loans kind of really flipped me upside down, right? But at the same time, like, okay, so when things get tough, here you go. I'll just bring it back up again. Like, you're gonna go say yes, even though the mood I set it in 4 years ago is gone, right? So what can we do today? Everything's temporary in this world, right? Like you start to
Yeah.
experience problems as people, and you're like, you start to build this like lost helplessness, and no, it's temporary, right? You can move through anything and everything. That's why I said like be careful what feelings you let in because we have a lot of them every single day, right? And they can literally dictate everything we do. So I think just taking some of that into, and again, you're catching me in this transition, so it's a really interesting thing to talk about. So I can't sit here and go, yes, completely transition going, but I think I've always had a vision. I think we need to do this with kids earlier, start letting them draw out pictures, write out visions, because I always thought that was just how people operated. The more I talk to people, I'm not sure that's the case. Like for me, and that kind of hurts because when you're talking to somebody, you're like, oh, why aren't you thinking like this? Like my brain automatically goes 3 years out and what I see. And I think as long as you can picture that and keep seeing it, right? Just because you go down a path and it doesn't work, well, great. Adjust the path, right? Like I always tell the kids, it's like
Yeah.
you're going through the woods and you're lost. You have no clue where the path is leading. That's what probably life's gonna feel like, right? Like you're going this way, didn't work. Okay, does that mean you stop and go backwards? No, you got to keep moving forward. It just might be a different path than what it looks like right now.
Yeah, it's funny. I always use for my entrepreneurs, I always use it. It's driving at night with the lights on, right? You make your decisions based on what's in front of you.
Yeah.
what you can see in front of you, but you have no idea what's out there.
Yeah.
Right. And life's kind of the same way, right? We're driving at night with the headlights on. Yeah, you can look behind you and know where you've come from and see it with perfect clarity and maybe what you should have done or a turn you should have taken, but you don't know what's ahead.
No.
Right. And to your point about vision and goals for these kids, I remember when I was, I think it was between my junior and senior year. My dad, he was a salesman, and he sat me down and he shared his goals with me. He had them written and he had them tucked in the back of his notebook. And he just, it was one of those intimate moments between a father and son. And he just said, here, let me show you these and blah, blah, blah. He showed me the written goals,
Yeah.
and why he wrote them, explained the process and that kind of stuff. And so I turned around and did the same. Right. And I did, and I hit those goals. And from that point forward for me, goal setting has all been about vision, setting the vision, writing it down and that kind of stuff. And I think if we, and the trouble is a lot of parents don't even understand that process themselves, to your point.
I have found, and again, I'm toying with this, right? Building this, we'll see where it all goes. I think it's, I believe that God will take care of that. But, I've done BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. They're like guiding lights, right? But they're way out there down the road.
Yeah.
You need that. If you don't have a guiding light, where are you going? And I think that's important, but I agree with you. I don't know if everybody thinks like that. I think that came from a lot of the sports world for me, and then I went and read about it more and studied it. Everyone's got their own path, and everyone's got to come to it in their own ways. But I think from an athlete standpoint, I'm not against goals. I think they're great. I think a lot of people make them and then don't achieve them, right? And they want to know why. So, I've taken a little bit of a different twist there. Like, I will have athletes write them down, and sometimes I'll throw them a curveball. I'll just straight up rip them up, right? And I'll rip them up.
Yeah.
And the reason I rip them up because I hand them another sheet and I'll be like, okay, now write your commitment to action, right? And that's what that sheet's called. I have it as part of our resources, right? And I want you to outline every action you're going to take to hit those pieces, right? Because the thing is most of the time you're going to write down 24 things and we're not going to get any of them done. So let's commit to what our action is and can we track that on a daily basis? And I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. It's easy to in today's world because we're living with these and these are accessible 24/7 and they can be distraction or they can be purposeful. And I think that's challenging. I think there's an app on there called, I'd have to look it up, Habits or something, and you can outline what you want and check it off daily, but do simple very, very well, right? Like it gets so complicated and we get caught up in the outcome that we forget to commit to the action. And that's why I'm cautious and careful with goals. I'm not against them, but at the same time, if our focus shifts too much towards them and we don't have action, like in discipline, we don't have anything, right? So at the same time, I've also read if you write them down, carry them with you, right? So you have a constant reminder of where they're at, because if they're sitting on a desk somewhere, my guess is out of sight, out of mind, right? Unless you're intentional about going back to them every single day, which reading that stat of 87% don't get their top 3 done, it makes me wonder, right?
Yeah. Well, and I would wonder of that 87%, how many actually even set a top 3 during the course of the day. But here's the problem. You say out of sight, out of mind, and you're right. I mean, God, we could talk about this stuff forever. But I'd love to have people, take their vision board, make a digital vision board, and make it your wallpaper.
Yeah.
Right. I want you seeing that all the time. I don't care if it's on your phone. Right. That every time you see that vision of what you're trying to form. So every time you go into your phone to waste time on Facebook or waste time on Instagram or any other social that you're playing around on, you see those goals sitting in front of you and say, is what I'm doing going to be more important than what I'm trying to achieve?
When I would tell business
all
owners,
of
use
that.
social media for business, right? I really try to keep personal out of it. And quite honestly, I don't even want my kids growing up with it, because we as society have fallen in love with highlight reels, whether it be sports, whether it be life. Hey, this looks great. Well, you missed everything that it took to get there, right? And when that story isn't told, we turn that highlight reel into, well, this is easy. This is achievable. There wasn't any pain or suffering in that. And I got news for you. I don't know any stories, whether it be sports, life, relationships, anything, that don't have those deep wounds. Like I always tell guys, like, are the surface wounds or the deep wounds the ones that you're going to grow through? We don't want to have the deep wounds, right? So I don't know much growth that happens on the surface level. It comes from those deep ones, right? When it really does affect you, and if you're willing to dive in, people would always ask, well, and same in business, right? I think my field's interesting, right? Which is why I'm shifting to. I think you get a lot of young coaches, and I've worked to attempt to mentor some of them. I think me and you had this talk last time, right? But when it's free, I thought of profit sharing as hey, this is pretty good for you, right? But like there's still no investment on their part, right? So the second it gets harder, they didn't get what they wanted, they're like, why? And I'm assuming some of that's part of that society. Like it's hard being 39 now, removed from ages 22 to 25. Like, did I miss that? Was I like, I never felt like I was totally like that. We're all on our own journey, but I also started my business at 22, right? So like, I didn't have, I feel like I never had that opportunity to go. I was doing it 7 days a week at that point in time on, right? Um, I feel like some of that mentorship, like they love the idea. And I think a lot of times we're interested in things, whether it be business but we're not committed to it, right? And that's why we show it. Like if you can outline 5 KPIs for somebody to how you can hit their key metrics, I'm telling you from my experience, most of the time they don't even hit them.
No, but that's even the process of getting to those KPIs. So many businesses we work with, so many ones that I talk to, they set that goal. It's a revenue goal, or if it's a profit goal, right? We're going to grow by 10 million over the next 2 years. The problem is revenue is a detective goal,
Yeah.
right? It's after the fact. You're not going to be able to say, you know, oh, I guarantee you we're going to hit 10 million unless you know the actions that are driving
Yeah.
it. You said it yourself. Let's tear it up and get the commitment to action. It's the same process of, okay, you want that goal, that's great, but you can't just be handed the goal. There's actions that have to take place. And if we dissect that into those things that we have to do to get us to that goal, now we can start to break it down. If it's a 5-year, 10-year goal, your BHAG that's sitting out there, break it down into where I want to be halfway there. Where do I want to be by the end of next year? Where do I want to be this quarter, this month, this week, today, this hour? What can I do this hour to start driving that? And you can't do that unless you have it into actions.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for you because this is something I did. So I was a baseball guy, so I was owner operator.
Sure.
Still a big struggle, right? Because owner operator, but I do have like people follow people in this world, right? And I struggle to get out of that owner operator role constantly. That's one of the reasons I feel like I'm evolving how this looks. I ethically believe
Mm-hmm.
that's the true way to go, right? And will have the most impact on families, athletes, and the community in the long run. And when I started working with some of the coaches, I have found that trainers and coaches most likely struggle to get to the business side on the other side, right? Like they
Yep.
struggle to sell. And I always try to turn sales to service, right? Like I always tell them, like it's a disservice if you have something you believe that impacts and serves others and it's valuable to them, and you're not giving it to them, then you're doing a disservice to them at that point. And if you don't think it's valuable, then we need to improve that piece, right? If it's not valuable enough to
Right.
actually do that. So I think that's a component there. But even like I have done weekly, I call them weekly success plans. I'm very careful with that word, right? Because you got to define it. But like it would have, hey, here's my top 3 things I want to do this week, and then it has what are my top 3 tasks I need to do to accomplish one, and then you do the same thing there. What do I need to start doing, stop doing, keep doing, right? And it wasn't even that long, and like I said, they get on this high where they'll fill it out, and then 2 weeks later they stop filling it out, right? Like
Yeah.
and I'm sure you see that too. I also think that's why when I hear you talk, you're like, I like working with business owners to do this because we're the ones that are going to do it, right? And I think when I'm looking at it and you get younger people, not every one of them are guaranteed to be a business owner, right? And they probably still have a lot to
Yeah.
learn, and a lot of them don't have experience in the real world yet either, and they may not like it once
Yeah.
they
I
do.
think that, well, and that's exactly it, because it's either it's not as much fun, right? You take them from, playing baseball, and now they're selling refrigerators, right? They have no intent, no drive to sell refrigerators, right? That's why so many former athletes try to stay connected to the athletics that they came up with. One is, yes, they may have seen it as their identity, and completely stepping away. They can't pull themselves from their identity, etc. I get that, but the other part is just pure enjoyment. It's what we love,
Yes.
right? We love. It's why I love working with athletes, because I love talking sports. It's where this podcast came from. I love talking sports. So you have the capability. This is where entrepreneurship is so powerful, because you have the capability to create something around something you love. And if it exists, can you buy it? Can you join it? Can you learn it? Can you become part of it? Or if it doesn't exist, can you go create it?
Yeah.
You're giving those coaches and trainers and stuff the opportunity to still do what they love. They just have to learn how to sell, or how to close a sale. The biggest issue is, I guarantee you, they're having great conversations with the
Yeah.
parents, and being able to talk about the value of this coaching and the mental side and all of that kind of stuff, they're just not closing.
Yeah.
They're not asking for the sale, right? So many people that come to me and talk to me about needing sales. I need to get more sales. I need to get more sales. Well, talk me through your sales process, and they walk all the way up through it. They do a great job of selling the value and all the features and everything else, even building the emotion in the individual that they're selling to, and the sales right there,
And they don't ask.
and they don't
They don't
ask
finish.
for the
Yeah.
sale. They'll say, okay, so are we ready to go? Can you agree on this, this, this? Yep, yep, I can agree. Okay, so what's stopping us? Let's
Yeah.
go. They don't take that extra step to put closure on the sale, because it's uncomfortable. It's not natural. It doesn't feel natural.
One of the things I'd always
Um,
thought about was building a sales team to sell for the trainers. I didn't have
yeah,
that luxury to do that financially just because of everything that hit with interest rates and SBA loans. But for
sure.
me, it was like, man, if you could have the trainers and leave them to what they're good. One of my mentors said, you'll never turn a sheep into a wolf, right? He's like, it's just not going to
Nope.
happen. And so can you do that? I haven't seen many do it because this is just the industry, and maybe that is the route to go. But you need funding to do that. If you had somebody constantly selling and I do think that's a skill set, but I do think it can be learned. I said that anything can be trained. I think it does come down to your commitment, how badly you want to do something, right? Because
Yep.
if you don't want to do it, then you're not going to do it. If you do, you'll make time for it, and I think that's the bottom line. But I think there's a large struggle, at least in what I've witnessed over the 18 years.
Now, you threw out the word funding, and before we wrap up, I want to make sure we get to some of these lessons from you.
Yes.
You had a tough time coming out of COVID, and you made some decisions coming out of COVID. Talk to us about that and what it's taught you as a business owner going forward.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've always been a very visionary person, very driven. I had a dream to build a hub that would impact community athletes and, you know, their families in a place where they can come and get everything, right? I wanted to build that. And when I got out of COVID, I think COVID was an eye opener to everyone, right? Anyone who is
Yeah.
leasing space, it created a lot of conflict between landlords and business owners. And you started to wonder, hey, what's the next step, right? And when we looked at that next step, for me, it was like, hey, the banks and SBA were handing out money at the time because of where our economy was, right? So, I had
Yep.
done my due diligence, and basically I found a diamond in the rough. It was ugly. It needed a lot of work, a lot of TLC, but I had no problem with that because like I said, I was very visionary at the time, still am. I could see it. I remember walking somebody through, and they're like, "Man, you really can see this," and I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "Don't you?" And I was like, he's like
Yeah.
sitting there, he's like, "No, it looks like crap right now." I'm like, I was like, all good," but it turned out great. I think probably one of my biggest lessons learned was I took two 7A SBA loans, right? And, I think from a contracting standpoint, everything turns out more expensive than you think. Those are just lessons you learn along
Always.
the way. I've heard that from everybody that's done projects. There's just unknown expenses, right? I think the thing I didn't know because I couldn't do a conventional loan was the SBA, they sit down and tell you, hey, here's your loans. Um, they're quarterly adjustments, right? And you look at the interest rate. The interest rate hadn't changed in 20 years, right? So they overfund you, right? So they give you $2.3 million, and it's at 5.5, 6%, right? And you're taking a risk because it was a little bigger than what I had done for the previous 18 years. But then the interest rate doubles, and it doubled fast after COVID, right?
Mm.
It goes from 5.5, 6 to 11.5, and on a size of a project like that changed everything for me. I'm not Walmart. I'm not blank. You're talking $15,000 a month that changes, and you have to accelerate everything, and it hurt business models. It's been a long 4 years, right? Still standing, still going, still moving. So, I would
Yeah.
challenge business owners because I know they go out there. There are other options. There's things called 504s that don't adjust quarterly. You have to ask a lot of questions. I think you get so caught up in what they're giving you because you're going to get your dream that you got to ask more questions. And, talking to other banks and other people, we're not there yet, but there's always a path, right? There is always a path. You just got to go find it. I would ask more questions because 504s and other options are better, but I would watch 7A quarterly adjustments. I know quite a few people that have been hit hard by that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but it's just it didn't help from a small business standpoint.
Yeah. And I think that a bunch of lessons there, and I appreciate you sharing the
Yeah.
story. A bunch of them in there around finding somebody you trust. Talk to as many people as you can. Don't just take, the first few people that you talk to and you start to hear the same things like, well, I guess that's the way it is. No, talk to people and question it all, especially for something that size, right? And um, if you haven't done that before, talk to as many people who have that you can, and not just the person who is giving you the loan,
Yes.
or is offering the loan or offering the investing. I do the same thing with individuals going down the investment route. Um, investment money isn't free,
No.
right? Yes, there's such a thing as angel investors, but it's still not free. There's VCs, there's PEs, but none of them come free. And so understand the impact it's going to have on your organization, understand the impact it's going to have on the way you run your organization. Even a bank loan, even an SBA, they're not an investor. They're not going to have, a stake or a say in my business. Oh, yes, they will.
Yes.
Right. Very much they will. And so anytime you bring in money from the outside, and it's not to say you shouldn't, it's just to say you need to do your due diligence in doing so.
Absolutely.
So the other big thing about that, which I think is the important part of what you pointed out, which is you had a plan in place,
Yes.
right? We knew how we were going to use it. I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. Was it more than I really needed to take? Probably. But as you said, when you start dealing with construction costs and redevelopment costs and all of that kind of stuff in a facility, who knows what you're going to uncover? And so
I could write a
we're
book on that
protected.
process, right?
I
On
bet.
GCs and contractors and everything else, right? It's just, it was a combination of everything, and it was a great learning experience. Like I said, doing it over again, which we don't get to do in life. Hindsight's 2020, right? So
Sure.
you take it, you learn, you keep moving forward. One of the things, there's a reason the mirrors are small and the windshield is big, right? Keep your focus forward, right? We can't live in the past. And I think a lot of us do, right? And all that does is create more feelings, more anxiety, more, how do I take a step forward, right? And again, if you listen to people that tell their stories, it's part of all their stories, right? Like, every great story has it. That's why I said, like, a society, we've fallen into this highlight reel thing. We're like, man, she's figured
Yeah.
it all out. 60, like, go listen to it. Like, I was just following somebody the other day, and she was like, I couldn't get out of bed. I was done. Like, my whole family was done, and like, she's like, I had to take the first step. Like, you don't see that, right? Because, and I'm more nervous for our kids that don't see it, right? Because it's wiring
Sure.
them a certain way. But no, I think we take these, and one of the questions I always tell kids to ask these days is, like, you see somebody, because we can all learn from each other, right? We're all human, we're all imperfect, and we're on a journey to get better. Hopefully, most of us, right? And I think
Yeah.
one thing you can ask is, what do you know now that you didn't know back then? And I think that's something you can ask every person, and every person can answer, hopefully answer that, and you can take something from everybody these days.
Well, that's a perfect cue because I ask it every time in this
Sorry for taking your
podcast.
stealing your thunder.
So here you go, Matt. Nope, it was coming. You gave us one of the lessons, that you've obviously been through the last handful of years. But if you look back to the young Matt Diesel and you say, kid, here's what you're going to need to know to go into business. What are the top couple things that you tell him?
I truly, just as I would in any sport, I would say it's easy to get caught up, and make sure you have an identity and your values outlined.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it comes to faith, family, self leadership, purposeful work, and just legacy and relationships, right? And I think if you can, I wish somebody would have told me to outline that 20 years ago. Um,
Yeah.
but again, we don't know what we don't know, right? We're human, and I'm probably going to say something 20 years from now that's even puts me in a different spot than I am today. I think those are such big pieces to make sure that you can start asking yourself, did I live my life out? Did I live my actions out every single day? Because if it's not purposeful, it's not impactful, it's not serving others, like, I think you're going to get to a spot one day that that you're going to feel a big hole inside. And just like I say, like when athletes are like, oh, they all got it together. And I'm like, how many of them have their identity wrapped up in good and bad in the game? And it's the same thing in business, right? Just a different avenue, or same thing in life and anything we do. That would be my one piece of advice, and just that ability to understand commitment and, stick-to-itiveness and resilience, because it is so easy to walk away from anything these days that, I think we need more in society that are willing to get dirty, get in the mud, and work through things. And that's where the true growth and impact comes in down the road.
No, I like it. And maybe we will do this in another 20 years. We'll see how it goes. Matt, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
So that's a wrap for this episode of Legacy Unscripted. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't just let it sit. Take action today to build your future. Make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, or share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've got a story to share, or you just want to connect, you know where to find me. Until next time, keep it real, keep it bold, and keep living your legacy.